One of Canada's biggest industries and one of the best investment opportunities we've seen in Canadian stocks in a decade is shifting dramatically. We've seen some gigantic news that's going to change the outcome of the next 5 years and might lead to one of the best bull runs the Canadian stock market has ever seen. Welcome to Golden Arch Investing. My name is Liam. Here we talk about investing in Canada. If that interests you at all, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a massive piece of news coming out of British Columbia that impacts the ability for Canada to build a new pipeline. And specifically, it impacts the idea that privately backed pipelines by companies like Enbridge, who we will talk about in this video, should be allowed to be built or will be blocked by political or public protest. Based on this sort of question, based on the idea of will this happen or not, you could see dramatic differences in outcomes for investors like you and I. The pipelines aren't built. We're talking about slow growth. We're talking about some challenges over the next 5 years. We're talking about looking at a dividend opportunity in Canadian oil. But if that thing does get built, we could be looking at returns we haven't seen since the early 2010s. I'm talking hundreds, if not thousands of % gains, massive special dividends, and the kinds of profits that most of us have never seen. Let's go to this article I have here from the CBC. It's from BC Premier David Eby, who says he's not opposed to privately backed oil pipelines to the North Coast. Now, when we had that big premiers meeting not that long ago, and I sort of brought up the idea that I think there were some positive signs in there that these projects would be at least put on the table and that maybe there would be something done in this sort of realm. I got a lot of pushback from people on the channel saying, nah, the NDP and BC will never back that. And while that might not be completely changed, it looks like this position is softening. And if you see the right combination of smart moves by whichever company proposes a project, I think the answer might actually be yes. And like I mentioned a moment ago, that could mean hundreds, if not thousands of % gains for those of us who own the Canadian oil producers. Let's read through this article. As Alberta Premier Danielle Smith pushes for a crude oil pipeline to British Columbia's North Coast, BC Premier David Eby says he's not simply saying no. Instead, he's saying he's against the public funding of such a pipeline. Now, we might want to zoom out here. What does that mean? Well, this is all about the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline. If you haven't heard this story, and I'm almost positive you had, basically the cost overruns building this thing, both from, policy reasons, but also from the insane engineering of getting through the Rocky Mountains, meant that the private proponent, the company building it, had to back out. And the federal government stepped in to not allow this thing to be abandoned and finish it out. This did cost the taxpayers billions of dollars. And a lot of people were real angry about it. It's been a big part of why pipelines are such a political issue to this day. Eby does not want that for this North Coast pipeline. What I don't support is tens of billions of dollars in federal subsidy going to build this new pipeline when we already own a pipeline that empties into British Columbia and has significant additional capacity, 200,000 barrels. Now here, he's referring to that TMX Trans Mountain pipeline. But what does he mean there's extra capacity? This is something people have talked about a lot, and it is true. There is extra capacity right now in the Trans Mountain pipeline. But the reason there's extra capacity is because companies did not just suddenly flood the market with extra oil in order to fill this thing. The cost of producing more oil sands, heavy oil, is insane. And while we are rising slowly, you can't just suddenly boom production, blow through capital, and then suddenly be left holding the bill when there's no more pipeline capacity and you're sitting with this stuff that you have nothing that you can do with. And so companies are slowly ramping their production until about 2027, which is only 2 years from now, when it will be completely full. The next pipeline, this new pipeline, is supposed to provide the opportunity for growth, allowing these companies to produce way more, profit from it more thanks to a reduced differential, and of course, make us shareholders a bunch of money. That's why the industry wants to build a new pipeline so badly, not because they need it this second, but because they know in order for the industry to grow, they're going to need it. Now, there are other factors that might allow it to grow, including an idea we've seen floating around that we might ship more to the Americans, which makes no sense today, but might make a lot of sense in 5 years. But we'll talk about that sort of later in this video. He added there's no company currently advocating for Smith's pipeline proposal. He says there's no money for it. He says that to chief political correspondent of the CBC, Rosemary Barton. Smith has been advocating for the bitumen pipeline to BC's northern tidewaters and said she is actively searching for interested private sector companies. She has suggested the pipeline's endpoint be in Prince Rupert, BC, avoiding the cancelled Northern Gateway's proposed terminus in another BC port, Kitimat. You heard of Kitimat? Of course you have. LNG Canada's there right now. And so, we're talking different areas, but these are basically next door. Let's say kitty corner to each other. If you look at it on a map, Kitimat and Prince Rupert are pretty close. It's basically two different ports along this sort of area of beautiful and wonderful fjord on BC's north coast. Eby says he wants to prioritize projects that are shovel ready. He says we've got major projects with private proponents, cash on the table, ready to go to hire people. Let's focus on those. He talks about LNG Canada, the Ksai Lisms north of Prince Rupert project, which has some big news about it going on. They approved a new natural gas pipeline going to that project. There's some good news about wood fiber LNG. There's some positive news around that. There's been a lot of positive LNG news. So he's basically saying we should focus on that and not on the oil, which, hey, we love LNG on this channel. We've talked about it a lot. So we talked about the natural gas opportunity and how those companies are printing cash and have already returned us a huge amount of money. We've seen, high double-digit returns from some of these companies at a time when we've seen huge uncertainty and huge instability in the Canadian market. So we're making cash hand over fist on LNG. We're just looking for the opportunity for oil to follow along. A lot of us have sort of built positions or are building positions in oil, thanks to a million different reasons. But this would just be the cherry on top, allowing it to really, really run. He talked about the tanker ban on the North Coast. Of course, this is a piece of legislation. Legislation is not permanent necessarily. We've seen lots of sort of ways to get around things. Smith has said she's going to convince Eby of this. And she said you should be on Team Canada about it. But I think the really interesting thing here is that he says at the bottom of this article, he'd be happy to sit down with Albertan officials if a private proponent came to the table without public money. So he's no longer saying no, which is a big change because the step from no to not yes, but not no is just about halfway to saying yeah. Now you might be wondering, okay, but is anybody actually going to bring a project to the table? And I think there might be. Now there's a million articles out there floating in the ethos saying that, the Alberta government has sort of been scrounging for different proponents. But I don't think we need to look that hard. I want us to zoom out a little bit and think about the oil industry in general. The most recent stuff we've talked about in this industry have been major mergers and acquisitions. We talked about the Whitecap Varen deal. We've talked about the Strathcona Meg deal. We talked about C&Q buying everybody's assets. We've even mentioned Cenovus, which is like tens of billions of dollars being on the table to be bought. There is huge money moving into Canadian oil and gas. There's a million reasons for this. The biggest one, in my opinion, is the decline of U.S. shale oil. Specifically, that magical Permian Basin has been slowly declining. The former CEO of Pioneer, one of the guys who pioneered this entire boom in the United States, has said, hey, we're running low on tier 1 inventory. We're going to be moving into tier 2. And as we've seen the oil price start to come back down after the sort of pump fake of conflict in the Middle East, I think we're going to continue to see that trend play out. That trend playing out means that America is going to suddenly need a lot more Canadian oil. They're going to suddenly look towards investing in some of these Canadian basins who are close by, who crucially are avoiding a lot of the geopolitical issues, are avoiding the same kind of choke points that have sort of made so many other oil basins dangerous, and that have access to world-class oil and natural gas resources. There's been a lot of money flowing into that industry. There's been a lot of money being put on the table by all sorts of different groups. Even Canada's banks have hit historic highs in financing for Canadian oil deals. There is money in this industry. Now, which company do I think is going to be the one to actually build this thing? Probably not going to surprise you. We're talking about Enbridge. Now, I want to talk about this company really briefly because I think there's a couple reasons why this company would make sense to do the project, but also I want to talk about why this might be an opportunity for them. So Enbridge, of course, is the former proponent of Northern Gateway. And you might be thinking that makes them less likely to do this project, and that could be true, but they're also the biggest dog. They're the biggest player in town. And these projects don't usually get done by just one team, right? It's usually a consortium of different companies moving in to, build the different terminals and the pipes and the, provide the construction and whatever, and own, chunks of it so they can afford to. But I think Enbridge is going to be part of this deal. Clearly, they already had a plan to build a pipeline. Yeah, it's going to need some modification, sure. But they had an idea of what was going to go down. They've probably gone through a lot of the work already. They probably have those same people on board. It's been about 10 years, but I'm sure a lot of that work could be reused to help them be first to the table, which is important in this world. Because if you want to get something approved, you want to make it a national interest thing, you want to get it through this, these 5 steps, you need Enbridge on the table. They also have recently done some big deals with Indigenous groups. And as much as I know some investors hate when I mention this, I think Indigenous ownership as an equity partner as part of this pipeline is crucial. It is one of the easiest ways you're going to see a yes come from the BC government and a yes come from the BC public. Seeing those two groups say yes, both the sort of political class in British Columbia, but also the general public, is crucial to avoiding another Northern Gateway style debacle. So I think you need to see some of the groups along this line put money on the table. Now, likely this is going to be money that is offered to them through financing options, but that's great. That's awesome. And we should see financiers who want this project to happen line up to offer the money because, again, them being on board is crucial and it brings profit for everyone. So why not? Following that, I think we're likely to see some international money step up. I would be surprised if we didn't see American money on the table, probably not from some of the companies that benefit from the crude oil differential, but there are some American companies who are looking to put money somewhere, who are looking to buy into this thing. We also have a couple of major Canadian asset managers who might have the ear of the Prime Minister and might own some pipelines and might also be willing to be here. In general, we're probably going to see Enbridge at the table. Why would that be a good thing? Well, I want us to look at one number. The dividend payout ratio of Enbridge right now is quite elevated. What does that mean? Well, basically, they're paying out a huge amount of dividends, a higher proportion of their dividends than they have free cash flows. That's essentially how that ratio works out. And so looking at that ratio, a lot of cautious investors are trying to figure out where does Enbridge get the growth so that they can continue to raise that dividend in perpetuity. I think this deal, along with a million others, and Enbridge is an incredibly well-run stock, but I think this deal could be a golden goose for them, particularly if you see serious movement from the federal government to actually get this project approved quickly and reduce as much as reasonably possible of the extra red tape. I am not saying don't do an environmental assessment. I am not saying don't do it right. I think doing it right is important for the future of Canada and for the future of this industry. But I think if the federal government really does get this done quick, you're likely to see a huge boon for Enbridge. It'll help them grow through some of the sort of shorter term challenges people are talking about. It'll give people some confidence in their longer term potential as a Canadian pipeline giant. Now, there's lots of other opportunities, not guaranteed. We could see a Pembina go up for this. We could see a TC Energy go up for this. Some of the other Canadian majors in the pipeline space. Maybe we see somebody else take over, right? Like, again, there's lots of other companies that own pipelines. There's lots of independent pipeline companies that are formed from little money from all sorts of producers. I don't know exactly, but I think you're likely to see Enbridge at the table for this just because they have the expertise and they have the motivation. Plus, they have some of the best people on earth for doing this stuff. They're one of the best managers of pipelines. They run one of the biggest pipeline systems in North America. Why wouldn't you want them at this deal? Realistically, why not? Makes a lot of sense for Enbridge to be there. I'm not saying this should be the name brand because of Northern Gateway. I think that an Indigenous group should be the name brand of this thing. It should have an Indigenous name. We should have Indigenous leadership of the consortium that builds it. Because again, all of those things will be huge for making this thing work. But I think Enbridge is going to be there. And I think their shareholders will benefit. Who else is going to benefit? The entire oil industry. Every dollar that we see that differential cut by, we are going to see billions of dollars of profit. And on top of that, allowing for growth is going to see huge stock market returns right up front. I think you're likely to see a massive bull run starting on the news of a project like this first being put on the table. You'll see it, the first initial pop, the initial excitement, that first little wave of excitement. And you'll probably see that peter out as we see it go into the assessment phase. Then you'll get approvals. Boom, another wave. And then you'll see it actually start getting built, right? It'll jump through all the hurdles. We're getting stuff actually put on the ground, and we'll be up by hundreds of percent over the next 2-3 years if this project does go through the process that I think is more and more likely to happen. I think you're likely to see big moves from the majors. We're talking, CNQ, basically one of the best pure plays you're going to see in Canadian heavy oil, benefits directly from this. But you're also going to see probably much larger moves from smaller players who are going to benefit more from this. What am I talking about? Well, think about Meg Energy, Strathcona Resources. We talked about them recently. A pure play Canadian heavy oil. Who would benefit more from a heavy oil pipeline than them? Think about a Cenovus. Big oil sands player, has some of the highest quality assets out there, great run flats. Think of somebody who'd be better to fill a heavy oil pipeline. And of course, Imperial and Suncor are going to benefit from this regardless. Partially because they might end up acquiring some of these assets, cough, cough, Cenovus, but also because they are the long, slow growth, last forever kind of player. They're some of the best run. And they do it all, right? They're an integrated giant in the Canadian space, and they benefit alongside the industry. The smaller the player, the riskier the bet, the higher you're going to see the return. But of course, if you're the kind of person who's going to take on a bunch of risks to buy a smaller player who could see an outsized return from this, then you're likely to also be the kind of player who every once in a while hits that home run. Personally, I own a big chunk of Canadian Natural Resources. I own a big chunk of Enbridge. I also own smaller chunks of a bunch of other players in this space. I own a lot of those big chunks in my public portfolio, the Larch Fund, which I talk about here on the channel, published. It's on Blossom Social. You can go look it up. Golden Larch Investing. It's on Snowball Analytics, right? That's my public portfolio. Big chunks of the bigger players because I'm a little bit of a cautious investor in the space. I'm really very bullish. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to buy a small cap player just because I think the bigger guys are likely to outlast, and I've got a pretty long time frame here. If you're into the smaller players, I think that's where the fast money is. But as always, the fast money comes with huge risk. Now, let me know what you think. Do you think we're seeing this sort of story move the right direction? Do you think we're actually going to see this stuff get done? You know what I think. You know that I'm a believer here. I think this is going to happen. I know it's sort of controversial, but I think we're going to get this project done. I think we're going to see some big movement here. And I think it's likely that Canadian oil is going to move fast. So those are my thoughts. That's about all I have for you folks today. Again, let me know what you think. Are there specific companies you think are going to win the most? Do you agree with my assessment? Do you disagree? Drop those comments down below. And as always, if you like this video, you want to see more content like this, I talk about this stuff just about every other day here on the channel. Publish a video every other day for months now. A lot of it has covered the Canadian oil and gas industry. I strongly recommend you check it out. Basically any company you could think of has either got a video on the channel or I've got a video that is being scripted right now. So that's sort of my thoughts on the industry. That's my thoughts on this project. And I really do hope I see you in the next video.